This is live. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you live again for another journey through our headlines, rolling up our sleeve and solving problems neighbor to neighbor. And that means we are at the tip of the spear of a renaissance of new information guided by understanding how Jesus's personhood revolution is unfolding in the daily news, the daily events that we're seeing. It's exciting. It's wonderful. It's exhilarating. And we are all a part of the ride. And the narratives that we tell with our life is performance art. Jesus did not write a word. His life was the word. He was the greatest performance and is the greatest performance artist of all time. He created the concept of the individual. He created the reality of a society that would protect the human person, no matter how weak or disabled. That's why Nazism and all these other forms are blasphemy, because they deny the human person has intrinsic value, even if they have frailties or disabilities or things of marginalization in other times. Jesus is the master of history. He created the concept of history. He created the concept of somewhere that we're going, progress. He created the concept of hospital. He created the concept of scientific revolution, of being able to do things outside of what the establishment says to do things. He is the one who destroys religions, which are binding agents based on sacrifice. Jesus did away with it when he flipped sacrifice on its head, to the point where now when you hear the word sacrifice, it is filled with the intention that Jesus put into the vocabulary, which means to sacrifice something of yourself. Right? That's what we talk about when you're on a fast for holy time, whether it's for Christmas or Lent. You say, I'm sacrificing what, right? I'm sacrificing food. I'm sacrificing TV. I'm sacrificing alcohol. We don't think of it. That's what it means to live life as a living sacrifice, not sacrifice of death. Death sacrifice is you offer the death of her firstborn, which is the way the ancient world did sacrifice, or you offer up an animal, which is how the Bible is it's like a heroin clinic for people who, in terms of a heroin rehab clinic, because the human civilization is up to that point. We're always trapped in this cycle of sacrificial violence, of killing human sacrifices, because they thought that's what the gods wanted. That's what would appease the gods' wrath or show God's favor or blessing on them. And that would oftentimes be their firstborn. That's why they talk about the ancient city of Jericho laying its foundations on the cost of the firstborn. That was a terrible thing. And that's what's so revolutionary about the Bible. Everybody looks at it today, the story of Abraham bringing Isaac up to the mountaintop to sacrifice, and we think, oh my goodness, how radical of an offering. To the time in which that text was written, that was not radical. It was considered the way God's wanted. They wanted your firstborn. What was radical was that this story, God says, no, I'm not going to do human sacrifice. You need something to satisfy your need for sacrifice. How about an animal instead of your own child? So there's personhood. The personhood revolution is being born in these moments, in these texts, and they ultimately culminate in the story of Jesus, who was the world's first performance artist, not a guru, not an ideologue, and not a theologian. Paul is more of a theologian. He's the one that creates concepts to explain and contain some of what was going on in what Jesus was doing in his life, death and resurrection. And you need both. You need anthropology and theology. But anthropology properly embodied is going to be incarnated with action. Action, incarnated, embodied truth is far superior to idea truth. Idea thinking is devoid of truth and power when compared to incarnational truth, which is what Jesus wants us to do. But so much of the time when we theologize Jesus without an incarnational anthropology undergirding the action part of how we are to imitate Jesus and be Jesus in our life, we get a disembodied Jesus. In other words, we get another pagan god cartoonized object. That's not what Jesus had in mind. But even in that ignorance, even in that error, Jesus' personhood revolution has still been able to work around the world through us, through our errors, through our limited graspings, and make beautiful things out of the brokenness of the world and renew it. Behold, I make all things new, he says. That's what performance art is. We are to live, we are to perform art every single day. A gentleman was telling me today that how you treat others, God responds to that, and how he treats you and the things he gives you in terms of blessings and opportunities, insights and delights. And it's not just good or bad, right? There's, wisdom. We look at the wisdom literature in the Bible, that it's about it's not a binary black or white thing, and sometimes there is a gradient of excellence that you can pursue. Like you can get layers and layers of sanctification working you towards a wiser and wiser approach to handling human relationships in your own life. And of course, we talk a lot on this show about the societal things, the big picture politics and culture things, and those are very deep and those are very hard. But ironically enough, that's actually the easy stuff compared to practicing Jesus's way of life in the day-to-day moments of every gritty little moment of life, right? When you're hungry, when you're tired, that old saying, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? And watch out if you find someone in America who is deeply hungry, and especially if they're eating a seed oil rich diet or a high fructose corn diet or a debauched garbage American wheat diet, or all three, God forbid, combined. And if they're eating a high seed oil, high corn syrup, high fake grain diet in America, they're going to probably have some lull spots where that ghrelin's going to kick in. They're going to get real nasty and snarling. I know I felt that way when I eat that way. If you don't, if you go too long, your sugar level and all that stuff, you can get real hungry and angry, and that's your body. It's an instinct kind of thing that's getting out of whack because of our system being abused by these artificial foods that are not meant to be for human flourishing, but for cheap profits that government subsidizes for a few corporations, right? But you can be in a state of hunger. You can be angry. Someone hurt you or mistreated you. You can feel lonely, right? That you don't feel loved, and you can feel very tired. And those are the areas in which things will come at you, and God will permit things to come at you to challenge you, to discipline you, to cultivate you into who your true capacity is. And we tend to fall back into the fleshly defense mode, and that's the wrong mistake. That's the wrong approach. The fresh perspective that I want to communicate to you is that defending yourself in the flesh is not going to get you where you want to go. You have to get rid of the concept of defense altogether and let heaven do your defense for you. Let God do your defense for you and stay in a state of joy. And I know that's not always possible. If you get a call that your loved one is dead or on death's door, that's hard to stay joyful. And sometimes it's actually not, because that's when the Spirit gives you a level of joy that you can't understand. Or someone disrespects you, betrays you grievously. Someone robs you. Someone dehumanizes you. All of those moments, we walk with those narratives, real and sometimes just perceived as real. And they bake into our psyche, and we create calluses that make us have knee-jerk defenses that are basically flesh-based, which doesn't mean it's purely evil, but it's certainly not the full potential that you were supposed to be. Okay? So if your enemy comes to you and attacks you and steals your coat, it's not necessarily wicked and evil to say, hey, that's my jacket. That's a fleshly defense mode that you're operating from. You're probably hungry, angry, lonely, tired, poor, tired of being pushed around, whatever. So you say, hey, that's my jacket. But if you're in a state of closeness to God, if you're connecting to God's creative power in the universe, you can walk on water, and in that moment that they come for your coat, you can say, hey, would you like my watch too? I don't need it. It's beautiful, but I'm tired of it. Because if you have that kind of joyful detachment from the things of the world, now you're starting to become free from the matrix of death anxiety. Death anxiety is different from fear of death. Fear of death is what you have when you stumble on your hike up a mountain, you almost die. That's a natural fear. You want to be afraid. You don't want to die, so you say, hey, watch out. I don't want to fall. But that's the thing, is that we have that death anxiety driving so much of the things that we do, that we cling so hard and fast to things of that fleshly kind of perspective of, oh, wait a second, you took my watch. Wait a second, you took over my country. Wait a second, you cut me off in traffic. And our defenses kick in, and those aren't really that effective. When you stay in the joy of the Lord, you have strength that is beyond comprehension. And I just wanted to set that out at the beginning. I think that's important that we set that as the framework. I think it's important that we saturate our mind in these things. I think it's important that we take time to ponder these things. I think it's important that we take time to step back and look at the mirror and see how our programmed way of behavior can be corrected with steady practice. I think it's important that we honor those around us in our community with patience, discernment, grace, and mercy. These are the characteristics that will transform our culture. I think it's important that we do these things. I think it's important that we repeat these things. I think it's a thing that we need to talk about forthrightly. I don't want to have a society that partitions these spiritual disciplines in some kind of religious ghetto. That is the opposite of where they need to be. They need to be out here in the civic space, which is why I am talking about them on a secular news talk program format and the podcast format. Because I'm going to contend for the faith. What is faith? Well, the opposite of faith is control. That gives you an insight into what faith is, which is trust. If you trust in Jesus' way, then it opens up a disposition towards moments, big and small, that allow you to allow you to prevail without the need to try to grasp for controlling the situation. We have to understand that this is what it means to have spiritual warfare. This is what it means to deal with wrestling against principalities and powers. Understanding that is so essential in getting our mindset right, in getting our language right. And what you put into the universe by the way you treat people comes back to you. And I'm not talking about karma. I'm saying, what does the Bible say? Whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosened in heaven. Loosed in heaven or whatever. Okay? What does that mean? It means if you're binding up stuff, or if you're loosing or unleashing things to people around you in the kind of relational social world, those things have a way of coming back at you. If you're sowing ugliness, meanness, bullying energy, if you're sowing defensiveness, you're going to find out that people and events and situations are going to make you more and more consumed with defensiveness. until it just swallows you up. If you are known as being a slick little, money-hungry person in the way you treat people, it's going to consume you up. It's going to come back to haunt you. These idols of behavior and habits become entrenched as rock-hard idols that enslave us to their kind of habit of being. Right? And that's what Jesus is talking about staying away from, because the mindset is oftentimes worse than the action. The mindset of stewing on these things is what drives people to do bad actions and take shortcuts to heaven that lead to hell on earth. And then it ends up causing more and more patterns of ugly behavior, which trickles out into a contagion of a rotten culture. And that's what we have to be mindful of in this time. We have to be mindful of how our thoughts end up creating the reality that we live in. If you think negatively, if you visualize negative things, if you believe you're going to fail, if you feel as if you're not going to succeed, you will create those same cycles of mental prison. If you feel like you're not good enough and you soak in that statement and you soak in that feeling and you let that permeate your heart to the point where your whole body vibrates on that frequency of magnetic particles, then you are going to create that kind of vibe and people will be repelled by your spirit. It's an ugly, vicious cycle. Grace breaks through that. Mercy breaks through that and sets you free from that. I know we're talking in more of a theological sense, but it's not. This is all very practical, anthropologically connected ways of thinking of how our actions impact the culture we're in. And I want you to understand that that's where these fake news narratives that billions and millions of people believe ultimately come from. You have to have a ground that is fertile for fake news in the mind for fake news to take hold like it does. Do you see what I mean? You have to have your mind fertile for fake news to take root in your heart. Whether you believe in the false narratives that the establishment and the corrupt government and corporations push out there, or you're constantly just reacting to it like the designated losers of Conservative Inc. do. And I don't say that they're losers objectively. I'm saying their game of playing that dialectic is a loser's game. You're ultimately stuck in the same frame when you're playing that game, struggling for power. Oh, my goodness, can you see what they're doing next? Well, that's fine. Say it, and I do say it. But don't stay there. Give a positive vision forward. And you don't have to have all the answers. You know what I mean? Like, I go back to a few of my favorite answers that I feel led to push into the conversation in my community, and that's what I'll go to. I'm not going to go after everything I don't know. I'm fascinated. Here's an example. I'm fascinated with how to figure out the housing thing. I want people to be able to own homes that are beautifully made and that are inexpensive at a point where people can buy homes without being totally saddled with debt for the rest of their lives. And I don't understand how to solve that problem in the big picture. It's not my specialty, but I want to learn if that opportunity opens up. But that's where we're at, folks. We've got to be able to have a practical approach to dealing with the times that we're in. And having a mind that is totally spent by all the different defensiveness, all the different personal kind of ignorance and arrogance that we stew and spread around us, it's all kind of culminating in a fertile ground of the mind by which these fake news, ridiculous narratives of only things that are new drugs that are on patent can help you with this new disease. And everybody's like, yes, that makes sense. Or the best people can do is just react against it and say, well, that's not true. Okay, but what are we going to do? We got to get people the truth somehow, and many great tireless people have done so on different fronts, right? Or the government says, yes, eat oils that were manufactured in a few years that are industrial waste products that are toxic, that are the type of materials that the seed uses to repel people from eating it. Not traditional oils like coconut oil and butter and stuff that have been eaten for thousands and thousands of years with no known heart disease, epidemic, or diabetes or any of that with it. And the humans said, yeah, that makes sense. We're the masters of the universe. Who needs God? We're God, right? And then, bam, 100 years of torturous diseases still afflict us. We take shortcuts to heaven on earth that lead to hell on earth. And so we don't want to mirror and imitate the spirit of power lust that we see from the establishment. Let's not struggle for power in this dialectic, this left versus right push-pull fight. Let's turn on the lights and see that it's just a movie. It's just a movie. The left versus right is just a movie. It's a mental prison that doesn't get us the results we want. We need to bind together as neighbors, as Americans, as people who want to get things done, who want to be healing, who want to get along with their neighbors, and they're going to dig in and they're going to use their joy to spread contagiously a new kind of community that heals wounds, that heals past problems and comments and statements, and makes a forward vision that's so exciting the meek shall inherit the earth as they accomplish it together. I'm David Gornoski. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. Stay tuned. We'll be having more news and comment after this short timeout. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. Hope you're doing well. We are live on FM and AM and our website, aneighborschoice.com. I want to go to some of these news stories that are of interest in the cycle of today's news media. There's a piece, Post-Millennial reports that Trump announces America needs a superhero in preview to major announcement. And he shows a graphic of an animation of himself in front of Trump Tower with a superhero uniform and laser eyes. The last time Trump previewed a major announcement, it was in the lead up to his November 15th reveal that he would be running for president in 2024. He could potentially be announcing a running mate for the vice presidential spot on his ticket. So we'll see what that is. Sounds like, is that a response to, Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, and his, donning of the mask and the new attire for his exploration of a potential presidential run? Some people have made animations and illustrations as if it was kind of like a superhero type performance art. what is going on with this special announcement tomorrow that Donald Trump is saying? Is he trying to kind of restart and revamp the tone of his campaign? Is he going to get a little bit more back to his roots with high energy, disruptive new ideas, whether you like them all or not? That was the energy of his original campaign. I don't think anybody can deny that. A lot of great energy, high energy, whether you like the ideas or not. So it remains to be seen what's going to come of that. So we'll see what happens with that tomorrow. Here's a story in the Washington Times. Fauci says he's not worried about Musk tweets, but they do raise personal risk. He says, of course, it's at risk. That's why I have armed federal agents with me at all the time, Dr. Fauci said. Dr. Fauci was responding to tweets from Mr. Musk that suggested Dr. Fauci had something to do with the origins of the COVID-19 virus through federal grants that supported bat research in China and a virology lab in Wuhan, where the pandemic started in late 2019. Well, he did. It's not just something to do. I don't know who wrote this piece, but I guess it's Tom Howell. Says, my pronouns are prosecute / Fauci, Mr. Musk tweeted over the weekend, sparking anger from persons who feared the message put the doctor at risk and simultaneously mocked gender fluid persons. Okay. Mr. Musk also posted a meme of Dr. Fauci advising Mr. Biden, one more lockdown, my king. Dr. Fauci told Nature that dust up isn't worth his time. I don't even feel I need to respond. You know, he's been living in a cocoon of fake news cartel media for so long. That's why he acts like that. I mean, you get destroyed if you do one little minor mistake. Meanwhile, these people can do ridiculous gain of function research in labs, bioweapon research, you know, playing with a loaded gun that is going to make a virus that wasn't lethal for humans reach into humans and go after. I really think we have to consider the game being played by Fauci. Okay? So first of all, let's start off with this. You don't scapegoat Fauci. I got to say that again. But just because we don't scapegoat him doesn't mean you don't have responsibility. If there has been wrongdoing, that is a valid use of a society's time to properly investigate those claims or those potential evidence. And so let's not confuse a proper role for societal protection if people are engaged in things that end up causing direct harm to even one soul, but let alone billions in the case of this pandemic. Now, justice, the way it ends up being mediated because of humans being the way we are, can tend to get sacrificially scapegoaty in its feel and vibe. I get that. It doesn't need to be. It shouldn't be. But that's the fallenness of human nature that gets into things and makes it not as effective. But at the same time, you see what Fauci's playing, the same playbook I've been telling you from the beginning. Remember this meme that Jesus put into reality for us to work with, that we have to work with. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Marvelous. Marvel means powerful, right? And what is more powerful in our eyes today than the claim of being a victim? What is more powerful than that, my friend? What transforms Western society and now the whole globe because of globalism and the interconnectedness, the contagion of these ideas of modernism and postmodernism, all deviations and ripoffs and imitations of the Christian spirit? What is more powerful than to claim to be victim? And then to have the most powerful media oligarchs in the world push that narrative 24/7. So somebody like Elon Musk says, I think we need to prosecute Fauci. Okay. These people on the establishment left and so forth and the neocons say prosecute Trump, prosecute Barron Trump, prosecute. They say this every single day. Prosecute this person. Prosecute. Matt Gaetz needs to be in prison. Anybody who looks at them wrong or is against war needs to go to prison. If you see it every single day, and Twitter and the government that had that relationship with Twitter amplified those hateful messages 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single second of the minute. They were just pushing that story. Prosecute anybody that moves. Prosecute Bannon. And they are the ones who've been trying and have put their political opponents in prison every single time. But the moment that somebody says that same thing back at them, but this time with real serious evidence that demands investigation, they can't handle it. Because they don't really operate from principles. They operate on a deep, deep worship and obsession and submission to power, which is all a mirage at the end of the day. Because it consumes them. It devours them and destroys them in their very existence, their very spirit. And they can't help but reveal it. So they play the victim game. They play the whole, I am the stone that the builders rejected. My goodness, you criticize me, you're going to get me hurt. Obviously, there's a kernel of truth in any of that. If you have enough, attention, you're going to get aggressive rhetoric and ugliness and sometimes real harm coming after you. If you say anything that is considered controversial, and everything is considered controversial in today's upside down loony bin world, right? To say loony bin is controversial, to say world is controversial, to say the word America is controversial, right? To say show up on time for work is controversial. To say do your best and be excellent is controversial. To say the words male and female is controversial. Everything has been controversial in this postmodern madness time where we can't get our heads out of this Gnostic house of mirrors of word plays and word games. Language constructs reality, they say, and language is inherently violent. That's the way of the spirit of our culture. And that's why there's so much attention that the government and its friends put into psychological operations to make the public a certain way. Why do they spend money on postmodernism? Why do they spend money on deconstructionist art? Why do they spend money pushing people towards things that lead to degeneration and breaking apart families? Because government and all of its little oligarchs are a jealous God, and they demand deep, deep trust and faith in their narratives for their own interests. And they want to remake humanity in their own image. They don't want to submit to the master of creation and the master of history, whose yoke is easy and burden is light. They don't like it. It's too ugly. It's too nasty to be loving. When you consume with power, love feels horrific. True love, agape, self-giving love. So when someone says prosecute because of the potential for serious evidence, which we have chronicled over the last few years, they have to play the natural stone the builders rejected type narrative game, right? They have to say, well, I'm a victim. You're trying to get me in harm's way. All I did was help people. No, you didn't. You helped your big pharma cartel friends, sir. That's what you did. You helped yourself. You helped government that wanted to consolidate the economy into the hands of fewer and fewer market actors, with mom and pop businesses being absolutely devastated. You wanted to help the government that wanted to display their power to get people to stop partaking in the Lord's Supper on Sunday, when the Lord's Supper predates their existence as an entity by a long shot, by a long ways. That was a total flex by a bunch of little gnat-type minded people. Gnat-minded people who think they're Goliath, but they're a paper tiger, because their whole narrative, their whole power depends on us buying into their narrative and then reacting to it That's what January 6th ended up being. It was a reaction that mirrored the ugly summer of love violence that was authorized by powerful forces and ugly, disgusting narratives tearing people apart and using real pain and tragedy to create more trauma and more pain and suffering for the least of these, those who need help, those who are in marginalized communities. So they hijacked this narrative of the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and they try to flip it back. But the truth, incarnationally, will win. You must enact the truth. Love enacted. Loving your neighbor beats the fake versions of love that the forces of principalities and powers give you. You know? They'll tell you all day long, don't have kids. But there's nothing that can compete with the incarnational reality of doing that which our Creator made us to do. They tell us that, this or that, take the seed oil, not the butter. But butter tastes better in a cookie than seed oil. Try it. Everything they come up with is just a cheap, stupid, dumb version of the real thing that God has already created. They say, don't do gender, don't define gender as we know it to be. We'll define it, and they come up with infinite genders. Very complicated, very angry. Lots of anger, depression, and pain as a result, because these things don't heal the problem. Nothing the culture tells you, nothing the establishment culture tells you brings you into reconciliation, forgiveness, and peace with your neighbor and those who've grieved you. Nothing. And there's nothing more powerful than peace and healing. Because holding hate and pain against against people who have done horrible things to you, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. And all these little tricks of these psychologically, manipulative forces, none of them can offer you the power of forgiveness and healing and reconciliation with your neighbor. They can't give you a sound mind. They're telling you to eat everything but what you should eat for a sound mind and a sound body. They're telling you that their life is not worth it. You shouldn't have children. There's nothing good to come. That's evil. It's a lie. That's why it's evil, because it's not true. It's not real. Sin is not real. It's fake. It's missing the mark because you're driving towards fantasy, not reality. And when you live out in a fantasy world, it makes you mentally sick, physically sick, spiritually sick, and your community gets sick. So live in the incarnational reality. Live in the analogical reality, the analog world, as Ray Peat would say, the late, great Ray Peat, Dr. Ray Peat, rest in peace. That's the mindset, folks, that'll win the day. That's the spirit that will transform and fight against empires. Not through our own natural defenses. There's a time for a little bit of that. Guys like to debate and joust, and sharpen iron versus iron, and that's fun. That's okay. But that's not what wins the day. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Having that deep, light, joyful lightness of being is contagious, and it transforms the world. That's why humor, when done well, is more powerful than almost any weapon in the world or any other concept or way of being. That joyful lightness of being that people just can't help but want to be around and be next to and emulate. But the society tells us to come up with all kinds of excuses as to why we don't get to be that way. But all it takes is one thing. All it takes is one question. You saw yesterday, Governor DeSantis, this is a Rebel News headline restating something we covered yesterday, but if you didn't hear it, Governor DeSantis seeks approval for grand jury to probe alleged misconduct in Florida's COVID-19 vaccine rollout. A statewide grand jury to investigate any wrongdoing in Florida with respect to the COVID-19 vaccines. He's also announced a public health commission that's going to look at what the FDA and all these things are doing at the federal level, which are basically cutouts of the industries they're supposedly regulating. The fox has been guarding the hen house for a long time. And it's only because we bought into the narrative that government is God that we allowed it to happen this long. Because we're so busy chasing our own little dream and got to get our Hawaii vacation, got to get our bigger home, got to pay off these exorbitant amounts of debts and so forth. We don't even bother to think about the Jubilee spirit, walking away from debts and not touching it again. But anyway, forget about that. My point is, we're so caught up in all these distractions that we don't even realize the idols and gods that we have baked into our sense of framing of life. We just don't even know. You can worship God so much you don't even know you're worshiping Him. If it's just part of your baked-in framework of ideology, and ideology is just another religion that's making you blind to the idols and gods, the fake gods of that ideology. So that you limit your horizon of what's possible. Every time there's a presidential election, the primaries or whatever, we can't get rid of the FDA. That's too hard. Yes, you can. But you don't do it by electing someone. It's one way to do it. The easier way to do it is to show embodied incarnational healing through dietary change and using FDA-approved drugs that doctors have the power to prescribe off-label, even though they've been persecuted for it, that are more effective than these constant new patented drugs that are extremely ineffective at best and dangerous and toxic and debilitating at worst many times. Just the embodied truth. That's what I'm trying to look. They can tell you all day long that eating a seed oil rich, PUFA fat rich diet is the best thing for your health, but nothing beats the incarnational reality of people getting away from seed oils and all the other junk and watching as their don't need a single medication, and they don't have heart disease, and they don't have their diabetes anymore, and they don't have psoriasis, or their lupus is fixing itself, or their sunburns are not as strong in the sun anymore, or their obesity problem is withering away. Those are the things. That's called incarnational truth. The proof is in the pudding is another way of saying it, right? That's what Jesus is all about. Action-based, incarnational, embodied truth. It's all nice in your head, but if it doesn't embody into real world, that's the same thing with Marxism, right? Great idea. You try to try it out in real world, it creates utter hell on earth. Because it tries to outcompete Jesus' kingdom of heaven that says the first shall be last and the last shall be first, but it tries to bring back the pagan sacred of sacrificing lives to get there, and that is antithetical to the reality that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. It's antithetical to the master of history saying God desires mercy, not sacrifice. And what Marxism and all those types of revolutionary fake ripoffs of Christianity failed to realize is that God said God desires mercy, not sacrifice. He didn't say God desires mercy via sacrifice. Sacrifice of another. And that's what Marxism fundamentally is all about. Got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, right? Might makes right. And that's why it's so important, because then you get one level analysis that says they're all just corrupt people making money at the top of any of these ideologies. They don't really believe in it. But no, it's important to deal with the ideology, because these ideologies are just ripoffs of the authentic Christianity, which is not an ideology, but a choice. It's a process. It's history itself. It's his story. It's Jesus' story. and you're a part of it, and you get to play, God will give you bigger and special roles in ways that the world will never even see as you play your part to the best of your ability. And let go of your fleshly defenses that create noise. The cross is already a scandal enough, and our fleshly defenses get in the way of that scandal and make noise and distract people from the offense of the cross, which is fascinating and mesmerizing in and of itself. We have to remember that we can do all things that we were meant to be through Christ who strengthens me, right? Say it with me. I can do all things I was meant to be through Christ who strengthens me. I know that's a play off of the Bible verse, but I wanted to make it rhyme so you can remember it. I can do all things I was meant to be. Your actions, your choices, realize who you were truly meant to be, made in the image of God. God wants you to walk on water. He wants you to do greater things than he did on earth through your participation in the grand story of history. So you can do all things that you were meant to be through Christ who strengthens me. It's through the power of Christ that you can sow beauty into the world. You can bless people when no one's looking, and you do it as a habit. You do it and make it not your second nature, but your first nature, and you keep practicing until it becomes more and more your first nature. And there will be times when you have pitfalls and you fall and you feel like you've just fallen down the stairs back down to the bottom. But it's not true. It's just in your head. It's just a Gnostic deviation. Right? Just hormones or ghrelin, or you're hungry or something. And don't let those emotions that stir up your heart make you believe that that's what you truly feel, because those emotions come and go. And sometimes they can be deceptive. So you're going to make mistakes, but don't relish in those mistakes, but also don't hit yourself and beat yourself up over it and say, oh, I'm back down to the bottom. No, you can do all things that you were meant to be through Christ who strengthens thee. Okay? So I want you to have that as your frame of thinking as you challenge yourself today and be that person you were meant to be. And that will be your way of dealing with all these toxic stories. We've sprinkled a few stories in. We were supposed to have a guest in this hour, and I made a mistake, and I flubbed that one. But we'll get him back on. You'll really like this guest. He's been on before. But I totally flubbed that. But that's okay. We had a great appointment together in this hour, and it all worked out in the way it needed to work out. And so in the next hour, we will have some great guests for you. Tucker Goodrich about seed oils and Shannon Braswell of Bright News. Always great to hear from both of them. You're going to love it. So stay tuned for that. Email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.